we will continue with the types of literary criticism. And the next kind of criticism is evaluative criticism, which assesses the value or worth of a work with reference to standards established by previous works. So it compares new works and it assesses new works in the light of old works. Now, these parameters could vary. They could be personal parameters, they could be moral, they could be aesthetic, and a proponent or an exponent of this kind of literary criticism was T.S. Eliot, who privileged and who gave a lot of importance to moral and ethical standards for evaluation. And in this approach, what happens is the worth of the work and its place in the literary hierarchy is established. So the work is not seen as an individual isolated piece of work, but it is part of a long tradition of literary works which are similar in nature, and a critical evaluation of this work then puts it in compares it with the other works, the previous works, and establishes its position in the long tradition of literary works. But there's a shortcoming of this approach, that it is highly dependent on the critic's subjective approach. Next, we look at historical criticism, which assesses a work in the context of the period in which it was created. So it gives a lot of importance to the historical background, the political upheavals, the historical events that were happening when the work was created. It takes into consideration social, economic, religious, political, and literary events, episodes, and incidents which may have influenced the text in question. So, this kind of criticism, when it evaluates a work, it looks at the writer and the work both as representatives of the age and the socio-political milieu in which the work was created. And it compares similar works created in the same period to establish the worth and the hierarchy and the position of the work in question. But a shortcoming of this kind of criticism is that it tends to preoccupy itself to an excessive extent with history. So the primary concern becomes history and the literary concern becomes secondary. Now, let's look at biographical criticism. This kind of criticism, as is evident from the type, assesses a work in context with the life of its author. So it takes into consideration the author's family background, the author's lineage, their ancestry, their personal ups and downs, their political beliefs, their personal experiences, their love life, their success, their failure, all of that. And it treats the literary text as a reflection of the author's life. And thus, when it has to decide the artistic and the literary worth of the work, this worth is determined by the biographical information which is which is available with the critic. And again, it compares similar works created in the same period to establish worth and hierarchy of the work. So, in a long tradition of biographies, where does this work stand? But a shortcoming of this kind of a critical approach is that it keeps concerning itself with the biographical or the personal details of the writer, and the literary worth becomes secondary and the writer's personal life becomes primary.